As a consumer advocate, though, Ralph Nader was deadly serious and single-minded. He dismissed overtures to run for office, even turning down an invitation to be George McGovern's presidential running mate in '72. On his own, Nader was a powerhouse, though his own house was, well, less than ordinary.
He didn't have a television, didn't drive an automobile, obviously, lived in a rooming house in Washington, D.C. with several other boarders, didn't even have his own telephone.
To call him frugal, in my mind, is like to assume he's a spendthrift. He bought like 10 pairs of combat boots in the 1950s and wore them for the next 20 and 30 years until they wore out.
He founded more than 40 consumer advocacy groups, each with its own area of influence, and all with Nader's fervent frugality.
So we would have to go across the street, put a coin in a phone booth, and make our long-distance calls.
We weren't allowed to have a Xerox machine because it cost too much, so we had to make everything in purple, this purple mimeograph.
He used to pay people 2 paychecks a year. That way he wouldn't have to waste as much time on payroll, signing checks, etc.
Ralph's life has been all about work. He never married. He's said to log 100-hour work weeks. The man who raised 1,000 issues never raised a family.
I don't believe in being an absentee father. And when you take on General Motors and Exxon and the drug companies, and the banks, the insurance companies, you don't have time for that.
But he did have a parent's pride when President Carter tapped dozens of former Raiders to join his staff. Ralph thought he'd be able to flex some fatherly muscle in the White House. He'd thought wrong.
He would call up his former employees who were placed in various positions throughout the Carter government and berate them for not getting things done fast enough. He'd claim they were sellouts. It dates to the beginning of Nader's decline in influence. It also dates to the beginning of Nader's disillusion with the Democrats.
In the 80s, his star continued to fall. As President Reagan's Morning in America was dawning, the sun was setting on Nader's activism.
They shut us out, in effect. And that's when you have to heed Thomas Jefferson's historic words, that when you lose your government, you got to go and try to get it back.
So Ralph Nader ran for president. In '92, he was a write-in candidate in the New Hampshire Democratic primary. In '96, he ran nationwide as the Green Party nominee. But the unsuccessful candidate still thought he had an open line to the White House.
Al Gore indicated he might call him back, but then Al Gore never called him back. Ralph Nader stewed about that for several years and then, I guess, had his revenge in 2000.
1996. Democrats are riding the Clinton-Gore wave, but Ralph Nader can't even get his calls to the White House returned.
It is true that Bill Clinton, and especially Al Gore, ignored Nader. And I don't mean ignored him on issues that he was marginal, but on regulatory issues, consumer issues, auto safety issues. You would have thought they would pick up the phone and bring him in occasionally. They didn't.
I mean, they just gave the civic community the straight arm because they said, you got nowhere to go. You're not going to vote for the Republicans. You're either going to have to stay home or vote for us.
Turned away and turned off by the two parties, Nader decided to crash the party in 2000.
Initially, we ignored Ralph Nader. We didn't think Ralph Nader would be any threat to Al Gore. We left it to members of the progressive community to attack Ralph Nader, to challenge Ralph Nader. And what we learned over the course of 3 months leading up to the election in November was that Ralph Nader was picking up steam in crucial battleground states like Michigan, Wisconsin.
November 7th, 2000. Ralph Nader suddenly became a figure of influence and importance. Why? Because he threw the election to George W. Bush. There were 2 states in 2000, New Hampshire and Florida, which it can reasonably be argued, based on the evidence, those states went for Bush but would have gone for Gore if Nader had not been on the ballot.
One assumption is all my votes come from Gore. It's completely false. The exit polls show 25% of my votes would have gone to Bush, 38% would have gone to Gore, the rest would not have voted.
I'm Ralph Nader, running for president.
Not one to back down from controversy, Nader has thrown his hat in the ring yet again, running this time as an independent.
I think Ralph Nader has had his own agenda for many years now. He believes that he's the only voice of the progressive movement, the only voice of the left, and as a result of it, Ralph Nader has decided that he should be president and not back the Democratic Party's nominees.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Twin Cities, Ralph Nader!
Liberal activist Michael Moore stood up for Nader in 2000. But recently, on Real Time with Bill Maher, he got on his knees.
Don't run, please. Don't do this, please. 95% of the people who worked longest with him and loved him the most, and I include myself in that group, implored him not to run and walked through the reasons. And to his credit, he was patient. He listened to all of us saying the same thing. And he said, it's Lincoln's cabinet. 12 nays, 1 aye, the ayes have it.
All these people who wrote me letters and asked to meet, they have got good jobs, good benefits, good health insurance, usually a good home. They can go to the theater anytime they want. That's not where my compass comes from.
Nader's strong sense of direction has cost him friends and support, and left many wondering just what makes Ralph run.
Because of his upbringing, particularly I think because of the fierce political arguments that he would have with his father growing up, Nader in some ways he's almost tone deaf. In his mind, democracy is kind of a contact sport. And so when people were livid, enraged at him, you could have no better person out there, no person better suited to handle that. I mean, he just felt like, oh, this is just democracy as usual.
I would have to say that Ralph Nader does have certain personality traits that might lend itself to vindictiveness. Primarily, he has a fairly distrusting aspect to his personality, which contributes to the us versus them view of the world.
I guess being a leader means that sometimes you have to be unpopular.
Though he's still fighting to get his name on ballots, he's finding popularity and funding in an unlikely place.
Where's it coming from? A good part of that money, like a quarter of the money he raised in Florida, is coming from Republicans. They said everybody should have a vote, even minority candidates should be on the ballot, and they say that with a straight face, as if, oh, it never really occurred to them that what they're doing is helping George Bush.
For their part, Democrats are openly trying to stop Nader.
All I'm asking is that we not let the perfect become the enemy of the good, because at this election it matters.
We have to get over
But the citizen candidate remains defiant.
The Democratic Party thinks it owns its voters, and it's willing to play dirty tricks on any challenger, including collaborating with the Republicans to pass laws to erect huge ballot access barriers so you can't even get on the ballot.
How long is the learning curve before we recognize that political parties are the problem?
Even in the face of another presidential dead heat, he still doesn't see himself as a spoiler.
We're either spoilers of all other candidates because we're all trying to get more votes from each other, or none of us are spoilers. If we believe that in America everyone has an equal right to run for office.
Is Nader motivated by conviction, political principle, or just plain old-fashioned ego?
When people today say, oh, he's acting out of ego, it's odd, because if he were acting out of ego merely, he knows if he loses badly and possibly, again, elects Bush, he could be ruined in terms of his legacy and his memory.
Who cares about my legacy? My legacy is established. They're not going to tear seatbelts out of cars. I look to the future. That's the important thing.
We are the union! We are the union!
At the age of 70, Nader shows no signs of letting up. His father, in fact, marched on until age 97.
My family doesn't retire. They wear out, I guess. Retire to what?
And Ralph Nader is still a man on a mission.
They don't understand me. To me, the greatest gratification in life is fighting for justice. Because justice is, as Senator Daniel Webster once said, the great work of human beings on earth. You have no liberty, no freedom, no pursuit of happiness without justice.
Ralph Nader's campaign hopes to get him on the ballot in more states than in 2000, but so far, that isn't the case. Nader even failed to qualify for the ballot in California. Meanwhile, the Nader camp is gearing up to fight for a spot in the presidential debates this fall.